Okay, and I believe I am live now. Folks, I'm waiting for my guest to come on board. He is Dean Ukine, and he's chair of ADPAC. ADPAC is the African Diaspora Public Affairs Committee. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the leading Black activist group that has got its tentacles out there. And I'm just waiting for Dean now. But I know this is lockdown, but I guess when you're traveling from the west wing of the house to the central part of the main estate, some people may struggle a little bit. I can see Dean there now.
How are you doing? Good evening.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much. I was just making excuses for you, saying you were coming from the west wing of the estate into the main part of the building. You know, some of us have to travel a long way.
Call it into fruition, please.
Let me manage their expectations. Anyway, Dean, look, thanks so much, because I think that what we're going to do tonight is an important conversation. So thanks for making the time. Before we go on, can you just briefly introduce yourself as to who you are and what is ADPAC?
Yeah, so I'm Dean Ukine, the founder of ADPAC. ADPAC is a national democratically representative organization specifically for the African diaspora population of the United Kingdom. We don't have any institutional representation, which is why we find ourselves in the position that we do.
And we being people
of African origin.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And based on that, due to my journey of 4 years in meeting delivery partners in a bid to coordinate the expertise of our brightest and best, this came to fruition and found itself as a model that goes across all the areas of our lives, employing those at the highest echelons as directors.
Superb. That's excellent. Look, I'm going to make the introduction now to what we're going to talk about.
And I'm just going to throw a charger in this because it's about to run out and I didn't realize
it's about to die. Okay.
Bear with me.
Yeah, no, sure. That's fine. As you do that, I'm just going to tell our guests or whoever's with us that this is going to be more or less more of a conversation between Dean and myself, talking about our concerns about the Racial Disparity Report that's been put out by Dr. Tony Sewell. So it's more of a conversation. This isn't so much of an interview. And we're going to kick some ideas around. Please keep your comments coming. I may not be able to interact because I'll be kind of focused on what Dean is saying and trying to keep our conversation fresh. But by all means, make your suggestions, because this is about you, not about me. And here we go.
Yes, sir.
So I'm calling this chat Sewell Must Go.
Absolutely.
How do we make Black appointees accountable to their communities? The 258-page Racial Disparity Report produced by Dr. Tony Sewell was almost universally condemned by Black and progressive bodies as unrepresentative of the lived experience of Black people in the United Kingdom. Dr. Sewell downplayed the existence of institutionalized racism and white privilege and highlighted class, culture, and religious factors as greater determinants of racial disparity in the UK. He thus subtly raised the idea of white victimhood as an unaddressed inequality. He went further to rebrand slavery as an opportunity for Africans to culturally renew themselves, putting a positive spin on slavery as not just being about profit. Insulting and outrageous as I found this report, we ask now, how we can hold Black appointees accountable to their communities and not just their paymasters. If we don't, more of these Black and minority ethnic appointees will be appointed to enable the diminishing of Black people in service to their masters. So, Dean, that's what that's where I am on this.
Yeah.
The first, the first question I got to ask you is, how did the report impact you?
Well, it impacted me in no way, shape, or form. And I remain resolute that I'm not going to react to any of the tactics that the government are using. What they're seeking to bring in is a policy of benign neglect that ignores any African diaspora concerns whatsoever. Based on that policy of, look, the government has the ability to put policy into practice. We don't currently. We would only be able to do that with a political vehicle to create that parity for ourselves, which we are capable of, and we will discuss this evening. But let's just question, first of all, if we have any recent examples of institutional racism that we're talking about. Because in order for Tony Sewell to make it a myth, he would have to disprove everything that I'm about to lay out in a very succinct case that happened last year. So last year was the 70th anniversary of the Windrush generation arriving en masse. That is where we were really gearing up to celebrate. But because England and the British government wanted us to know exactly where we were in terms of their stance on our population, they decided to create a hostile environment. So here's how institutional racism works. The government creates a policy to execute a hostile environment. The Home Office, via the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, ordered the civil service to destroy records of naturalization from the Windrush generation who were invited here, incidentally, to rebuild Britain. So they took positions in the NHS, the London Underground, the civil service, and all the menial jobs that Britain didn't want to do to rebuild the country. We answered the call. We were highly successful in rebuilding Britain. Now, what they did was create a hostile environment for those who survived and for their children who had legal, naturalized positions as children from the colonies who were invited. Then what they did was enlist an intra-agency approach to maintaining that hostile environment policy, which involved the Immigration Department, law enforcement, the DWP to stop all claims or any benefits.
What's the DWP, for those who don't know?
The Department of Work and Pensions,
Got it.
the NHS, and local authority, so that life would become untenable for any of those people who'd had their records destroyed by a state to create a racist policy targeting African Caribbeans. Then what they sought to do was asset strip the victims and kidnap and deport them. Now, some of those died abroad, some from old age, a couple from murders, and what the government then sought to do was act as the rapist and the jury in what compensation they would give, who they would give it to, how they would hand out that. And the whole thing is asked backwards. When we have something of this nature, if we had a national institution that were representative of African and African Caribbean interests, we would lodge our money with the barristers' chambers and start to build on a case for mass civil litigation against the government for and on behalf of those Windrush.
It'd be like a class action suit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what's interesting is I have a friend who has worked in local authority politics for many years, and the phrase she keeps coming up is that she can't imagine the Jewish Board of Deputies sitting back and watching somebody come up with a report which says that anti-Semitism isn't a thing, or
Yeah.
even if it is, it's something that is so trivial that Britain should be held up as an example of wonderful success and achievement in fighting anti-Semitism. But then, of course, the difference between us and the Jewish community is that they have this Jewish Board of Deputies,
Yes.
which, you know, I think the angels fear to tread in front of the Jewish Board of Deputies because they will eviscerate you if you so
Absolutely.
much as think of abusing the rights of Jewish people. Where is our equivalent body within the Black community, Dean?
Well, there has been none because we lie in disparate pockets, and no organization has stepped forward to say that they're going to coordinate a national activity. We find ourselves in a position that somebody who has transformed into a shill of racist interests because he's a shill for hire. Let's be frank, he got his 30 pieces of silver, and we're talking about Tony Sewell now. And based on our lack of coordinated services, communication, structures, and a lack of institutional bodies, he's allowed to slip through the cracks and do a poor man's impression of representing us. When we knew it wasn't a fact, the government definitely knew it wasn't a fact. They knew they had a shill to lay out the...
What's a shill, Dean? Educate me.
A shill is somebody who carries water for somebody's interests.
Got it.
Now,
Water barrier.
It's fair to say that me and you carry water for African origin interests.
Sure.
And that there are those like Candace Owens, to make a comparison to Tony Sewell, carry the water of the far right.
Got it.
On behalf of their paymasters against us.
Now, against their own people. Got it. Exactly. Got it.
And the reason that they're well positioned is so that when they are the face of a racist policy, we can't call it racism, because their paymasters just look the other way and push those who are on receipt of their wages forward. Okay. And they do a very good job.
Okay. I have to ask also, did you see this report coming? I tell you why I asked the question. Because there was supposed to be an interim report around about the time of an interim report on the causes of the differential deaths under COVID, around about the time of the Black Lives Matters protests. That was kicked out. That was kicked forward. And because the reason that was given was that at the time, things, you know, the atmosphere was too febrile. I mean, Black Lives Matter demonstrations were going on in 50 countries. And so they felt that this wasn't the right time for us to be discussing such kind of incendiary matters. So did you see that this kind of report was coming in the racial disparity report that Tony Sewell's put out?
Absolutely. I think anybody with ears to hear and eyes to see saw it coming, because it's a way of weakening our movement. And when I say our movement, let's just create a solid line in the sand between Black Lives Matter, the organization, and the Black Lives Matter movement that can be conflated with that politicians are taking advantage of the lack of clarity by saying Black Lives Matter, because you have African origin people that have no truck with that organization. So the minute that we start to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and the two are conflated, politicians, right-wing, let's say social commentators, will always utilize the gaps between us and the organization.
Got it.
We are now extrapolating them from the conversation because they live on the fringes of our community. The people that they attracted were those who've been on the fringes of our community, found something to meet their passions, which was really based on their reactionary nature, because nothing came of it. So Keir Starmer was correct when he was being dismissive and said that he saw it as a moment, not a movement. And I knew he'd be correct, because you cannot march them up to the top of the hill and march them down again for 6 weeks. without a clear strategy. However, what I will
Going
say,
forward, yeah,
is that once we have a clarity, it must be based on systems. So what I and colleagues have been developing within ADPAC are systems. So we start off with what our common denominators are. And as we put them forward, we have a very simple 3-step code. Do you agree in principle? Yes, fantastic. Let's adopt. Are we adopting? Let's apply. So what does that look like practically? Think about ADPAC right now having a digital platform that all organizations, grassroots, advocates, and professionals are plugged into. So you're planning a march now, and we would coordinate that with security and monitors such as Forever Family, with a desire to monetize them so that works for and on behalf of our community. Now, why would you have a march? A march is about galvanizing our people so that each of those march organizers can signpost all of the organizations for them to volunteer in so they can continue those passions practically. At the same time as we have a march, we make the simple request, which is really an instruction for all of those people involved to sign the petition. Petitions don't stop anything or change anything, just like CCT doesn't stop a rape or a murder. But what it does is it records the data that backs up our argument. So when we're moving forward with an entirely coordinated campaign, we have a march that has galvanized 1,000 people, where you might get 300 to 400 volunteers for our grassroots organizations to utilize their intellectual capital, experience, and also their relationships to make those organizations more robust, plus the donations, which we cannot discount, which I'll go into in a minute, leads to the rise of the characters like Tony Sewell based on our community apathy. But then we use the data from the change.org petitions so that when we're having our arguments, we can concretely say there's 1 million people here who disagree, which is a robust enough number, I think, to inform any conversation.
okay.
And then when we have a We Matter campaign to utilize influencers and celebrities in a thunderclap, where you've recorded in the studio 100 celebrities, influencers, social commentators, all speaking about the same thing for 2 minutes based on their own perspective. That covers all of us because we're not a monolith. And we release that day, date, and hour with a bullseye of one target, which could have been Tony Sewell, it could have been the government, it could be anybody, but it unifies us and it finds our common denominator. So all of this is dependent on systems.
Okay, so what's the 3 steps involved there?
Agree, adopt, and apply. So this is code that is universal, because what you start to do is create laws. Laws are an absolute. Red means stop, amber means get ready, and green means go. It's got to be palatable, it's got to be simple to adopt, and it's got to be even more simple to apply.
Okay. You see, the next thing that comes to my mind was that about the report was that I see a pattern here emerging. Absolutely. Where minority ethnics are picked up, with the personas that are required. I mean, Tony has thrown out some fantastic stats about how actually educational centric Black people are, and our educational qualifications are falling out of our ears. I wish it made a difference in the workplace. I wish that could be translated into income. However, so here's a man, Tony's got his PhD, he's got an honorary PhD doctorate from Exeter, one of the top universities in the country. He's got another honorary PhD from the University of Essex. He's an honorary fellow of the University College. I mean, he is absolutely draped in these qualifications. Then he is given the CBE by the Queen, which is a bit like the crown on top of all of these qualifications. Now, Tony is no slouch. However, he is totally unrepresentative of the thoughts attitudes and beliefs of the community he has been selected to be a representative of. Can you see this pattern coming where individuals amongst us are cherry picked, given a gong, given an elevated position, and then all of a sudden they're singing the tune of the paymaster, and black people are saying, "Excuse me, I used to know that person once. What's he talking about? What reality, what planet has he been living on?" So can you see this pattern?
Here's the thing. So the first thing I will preface this with is a question. Where is our counterpart that socially and financially rewards somebody of that caliber and qualification? And if it doesn't exist, we've got to ask fundamental questions about what we're doing.
Good.
And it leads us to understand why they go from backwards, from Saul to Paul on the road to Damascus on the backward donkey. Because they didn't start out that way. So I am learning to face this with more compassion when I look at the ones that we lose, because they are fallen soldiers. And although they have become perpetual aggressors within our community and as our Yiddish brethren would call them, collaborators, which they are, because we are in a hostile environment and their role is to legitimize the hostile environment.
Like Trojan horses. Yeah.
No, there's nothing outside of that. But when we can look at their history and say they didn't start out like this, I personally know how hard it gets when you are driving for our people who you would break your back, who wouldn't push your wheelchair. And if there isn't a resolve there that is laid in spiritual fortitude outside of your intellect, most of us would defect to the opposition, who reward well socially, hence your CBEs and all the doors that are opened, and then financially. So that's just the ground in which they are created. Then we have to ask what to do with them once they're there. Because once they're there and they have a certain track record, there is no redeeming. And then we're just talking about accountability. How do the Jewish community uphold that accountability? They are organized. They are only 246,000. It's a minute number of them that have the structures in place to hold them accountable. What we are is nearly 3 million, but highly unorganized and disjointed. That makes us collectively inadequate. Now, if we recognize that we're collectively inadequate and that hurts our feelings and it's time to do something about it, first of all, we have to signpost what is out. And I always say, get in where you fit. But then all of those organizations have to align in an organizational structure. And that is the point of an umbrella, like ADPAC. As I say, umbrellas don't make it rain, but they do protect you from the rain. So an umbrella doesn't make the case for racism. Racism is there. An umbrella protects us because it unifies our advocates, professionals. So to take an example like the schools to industry pipeline, that is an intra-agency approach to create wraparound care for the African origin family that focuses on the child. So there's no area they can drop through the cracks based on that intra-agency approach.
Sure. Now, while these structures are being created, while the coalition is taking place between the 3 million of us against, say, the 240,000 Jewish community, which presents as a single phalanx of people who are therefore impossible to ignore. When something like this happens with this report, my first tweet was for Tony to consider his position and go. I am now asking actively for Tony to resign.
Absolutely.
Because my worry, my fear, Dean, is that if today we all sit down on our fingers and watch this thing pass, what will they fly past us next time? I mean, that is for me a clear and present danger. And it
Absolutely.
also presents a problem in that some of us are supposed to be elders. Where are those elders? Where are they?
Yeah.
Because if they don't speak, we're done for. What's
I
your take on
concur.
that?
Well, first of all, immense gratitude that I could pick up the phone to you anytime for advice, for contacts, for a wiser perspective, because we can't maintain this intergenerational gap that we've had. And this is another point of ADPAC, which is about the healing of our people to close the intergenerational gaps, which is why our children can be as feral as killing out of curiosity just to see how a body drops. So once we at this end of the scale start to address the intergenerational gaps, we start to put the apparatus in place. So delivery partners for me are guys like Black Ballad, the Black Knowledge Society, to propagate the world with a line, because we must create a line to take that comes out on a weekly basis that goes to all of our owned media outlets so that we do start to sing in unison. And then that's how we create the code, because slow exposure is the only way that it works. Drip feed.
Terrific. Dean, let me, I really want to break this thing down. First, you mentioned the line. Secondly, you mentioned the code. What do you mean by the line? I'm on the journalistic end of this thing.
Absolutely.
And I do PR as well. But the whole organizational end of this thing is an enterprise all of itself. And it seems to me that ADPAC has not stolen a march, but has advanced through bitter experience, learning as you go and so on, along this line of organization. So what do you mean by the line? What do you mean by the code?
So the line is one that separates those who, and let's just break it down to cold, hard facts. Benefit the community. We ask, are they more of a win than a loss? Because we all come with our nuances. I said, we all come with our nuances. Sure. So it is about whether we are more of an asset to the community than a liability. So we draw a line in the sand for those that are a clear liability and those who are intentional about being assets to the community, or at least not liabilities. And we get to a stage where we do become flawed. And as long as we acknowledge that, we always keep it in check. But for those who are obtuse and there's no misapprehension as to whether they're a liability, we place them over there, and we must create apparatus that excommunicate them from any benefits in African society whatsoever.
So what you're saying is that let's not make quick, the Norwegians had this guy called Quisling who turned over his country. He set up a mini kind of Nazi state within Norway when the Nazis invaded Germany, and he gave his name to traitorous what's the word? Traitorous collaboration. Now, it seems that there are so many in our communities who get elevated to certain positions and they reach that space, and it's almost as if they become gatekeepers rather than whereas their organizations will say, oh, look, don't we have all of these Black executives up here and so on and so forth? But our lived experience is that those black executives up there are actually holding back their own. And that's a traitorous collaboration. And this comes back down to the conversation you're having about, well, to stop that situation happening, we need to be able to reward our people in such a way that they have a healthy and constructive alternative to what they're going to do. But how do we deal with this? I mean, you mentioned the code. What is the code that we need to put about within our community?
Well, the code in essence is about self-preservation. And the reason we will always hark to our distant cousins, the descendants of Ashkenazi Khazarian Empire, is because they practice that if you touch one Jew, you touch all Jews. We saw Lebanon bombed for a week straight because one soldier was murdered. So the airport runs, the airport strip, all the institutional buildings, the whole country was leveled in 2007. And there was no international response other than Jon Snow sitting in the studio by himself in front of a camera with no operator to give his oratory and his personal social comment to that. You should look it up. It's very interesting broadcast and very courageous of Jon Snow. However, based on the strength and the propaganda position of the IDS in calling anybody anti-Semitic who was in disagreement, the world laid silent, and the US was complicit and Britain was complicit, and there was talk of the white phosphorus being used, which is illegal internationally, as we know it melts
it's a war
through
crime, absolutely.
building. It's a war crime, absolutely. But one unacknowledged under the some 60 resolutions against the state by the UN, which is the body that is not actually set up to be against them. In any case, they have created ramifications where you will pay. And because we have been extrapolated from the continent, psychologically, spiritually, we don't work under a premise that a strong Africa means strong Africans globally. So when you left breadcrumbs to the fact that there is a race industry, and there are certain organizations like Big Pharma where it's more profitable for them to have the racial fight that continues than to cure racism. So I don't get involved in the race industry. I deal with our ethnicity, and ADPAC deals with our ethnicity. And we align that with our family on the continent in the African Union, where ADPAC and our secondary interests, like APAC in the States for our distant cousins, taps into Israel. So the diaspora region is our direct contact that represents our interests, so that we grow those interests out together. And a strong Africa represents strong Africans here. And what we do in tandem to develop here and on the continent.
I think that this is something that I'd like to kick around a little bit. I'm, as you know, of Ghanaian origin. As by your surname, I can tell that your dad must have been Ghanaian.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there are lots of people who sit back home in Ghana, in Africa, not just Ghana, in Africa. And they think that, look, there's Dean, there's Tet, and they're over in London, and they're going through all of this stuff, and really it's their fight. I mean, they wish us well, but actually it's not our fight. I mean, I have an argument, a very strong argument against that. But why do you think that this idea that what's happening here, what's happening with Dr. Sewell and us in Britain, isn't it a cipher for what happens globally? Share your perspective on that, Dee.
Absolutely. So to deal with the political side here, the environment that's been created is one of benign neglect, where the government is creating fertile ground to ignore all African problems, challenges, racism. That's duplicated from the States, and a policy that was enacted over African Americans, which is very successful in today. Why do Africans on the continent feel separate from us? Because we're of no economic benefit. Look at what American Jews are worth to the state of Israel. They're an amazing asset economically because they fight on Capitol Hill for the $3 billion contribution towards military contracts. Now, we know military contracts go through every area of business. So all of the research and development that is done in tech companies in Israel can be made possible via that 3 billion, which is also commensurate to the United States' entire world aid development budget for one tiny nation of around 6 million people, which is bizarre when you look at it statistically. In any case, when we understand that APAC has a trade and industry department, and we're exploring not only trade missions, but creating initiatives now that partner with Ghanaian entrepreneurs, where we can create manufacturing on the ground, knowing that £400 a month is a middle-class income in Ghana as a macro economy, and we can take investments to build exponential wealth by exporting products right back to Britain, where there's no import or export duty, because Ghana replaced Europe under the Brexit deal. So when we're made aware of things like this, entrepreneurs go like that. People who are savvy in terms of politics go like that. Policymakers do that. And then we start to build those strong interconnected relationships where we're just going back and forth and we're building trade. And when you realize, if we are all saying that it's an underdeveloped country, we are now initiating the reverse brain drain to create exponential wealth for ourselves as Africans. And our role is to make African origin people in the UK the first delivery partners to the continent, because we want to replace the Chinese, the Europeans. So if our brothers and sisters are waiting for us, they require for us to turn up. They can't be there waiting for us to figure out our fantasies. But if an institution is putting the apparatus in place to create these interconnected relationships that are mutually beneficial to both sides. Think about a call center in a nation where English is the first language.
Sorry, think about what was that, the call center? Got it.
Not in Bangladesh, where the first language isn't English and we have great difficulty understanding the operators, but in Ghana, where English is the first language to provide services here. So even coming in cheaper than AI, which frustrates the hell out of all of us when we're on the phone, and the ability to speak to an educated human being who's being well remunerated where they are, is win, win, win. Now, when we start to economically impact directly people on the continent, they will start to champion us here because it's within their social and economic interests.
Excellent. Dean, I'm going to wrap this up now by going to the close on the specific response. It's interesting that what appears to have been a problem has been the opening gambit for us to reevaluate our situation. Thank you very much, Dr. Sewell. You've shone a bright light on where the cracks and the flaws are in our way of being, in our way of social organization, our way of political and economic organization. So to that extent, thank you very much. And there has to be a response. I'm putting out the hashtag Sewell must go. And I'm doing that not out of spite, because there is nothing personal in this whatsoever. No. It is purely a defensive gesture. So people understand that just because somebody gives you an MBE, an OBE, or a CBE, just because they give you a fancy office which is very close to Whitehall, just because you're elevated into positions where you're sitting down and rubbing shoulders with quote unquote the higher ups in our society, you get the right to throw your own people under the bus. That's the first reason. The second reason is I want to signal to the government that when they appoint somebody to deal with our interests, that they appoint somebody that we in the first place recognize. Because why is it that whenever somebody is held up, selected by government to represent Black people, I wind up scratching my head and going, who is that? Or why them? Happens all the time. So I'm going to put this hashtag out, and those of you who find yourselves able to support it, please support it. If we say nothing, all we're saying is bring it on. Please bring somebody else on. You kick me in the groin this time. Next time you can kick me in the head, and I'll be happy with it. And well done.
I'll just go a step further. In fact, I would put this out as the first test for the code that we're talking about. Do you agree that Tony Sewell should go? Then adopt the hashtag and apply the hashtag. And do it right now. Just put the hashtag on your Twitter, put the hashtag by itself on your Facebook. If you agree, adopt, apply. Red means stop, amber means get ready, green means go. This is a social experiment just to see if we can obey instruction that serves our interests.
Or serve an idea that serves our interests.
Absolutely.
I love that. I absolutely love that. With that, I think we're going to bring this round to a close, but we've got to chat it. I think this is only really the beginning of a conversation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And is it Easter this weekend? It's Easter, isn't it?
It's Good Friday and Easter Sunday, where everything is a sin, apparently, because Zeus was redeemed and came back. Okay.
Terrific. Guys, happy Easter for those of you who were Christians, and have a really great weekend. Dean, thank you so much for your time, and let's continue this. Yeah, it's only just started. All the best.
Take care.
Cheers.